a ruling to this effect in Louisiana versus Calais could affect up to potentially 50 legislative districts.
This decision by this illegitimate Supreme Court majority strikes a blow against the Voting Rights Act and is designed to undermine the ability of communities of color all across this country.
Well, folks, finally some good news for once, because this cannot be understated. It is a catastrophically terrible day, in fact, a terrible week for Democrats with the redistricting wars, because the major headline, as you may have heard of today, is that the Supreme Court has effectively gutted Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act. We'll explain what that means, but it really should net Republicans about anywhere from 10 to 20 new seats across the South, but it actually doesn't stop there. On this same exact day, Florida Republicans have now approved their plan to redistrict before 2026, so that is going ahead. We were wondering whether the Rhinos would drop the ball there as they did in Indiana. Not happening. That is indeed advancing, but simultaneously, in something that I was actually skeptical about, it looks like the Virginia Supreme Court is now upholding the temporary injunction that would block the Virginia referendum in terms of redistricting that they just did from actually taking effect. So it's total wipeout day for Democrats. And if you don't want to believe my words on that, take a listen to how Democrats are currently reacting to recent news. Because yes, like it really is that bad for them.
And now we're at a point where affirmative action is gone, diversity is gone, equity gone, inclusion gone, racial tolerance gone, the Voting Rights Act largely gone. But guess what, extremists? We're still here. That's right. And we're not going anywhere. And we believe in this country.
Well, yes, Hakeem Jeffries, that is indeed the entire point. We are indeed getting rid of affirmative action, diversity, equity, and inclusion. All words, by the way, which could be used to summarize the racist Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act. But nonetheless, you notice the mood in there. It's not even panic, it's almost like a funeral in there at this point. And that is basically the somber mood of Democrats today. Because why? The fake artificial construct that they used for so many decades to pretend to have political control in this country, to effectively rig national elections and, oh, what's that word? Gerrymander the entire country no longer exists. It's been struck down by the Supreme Court. And notice how when Democrats, these people always talk about gerrymandering, but in reality, when they actually have to play fair, they absolutely lose their blank. And we'll explain all of these stories. Again, latest updates on redistricting from all over the country in today's video. First, though, do us a favor. If you enjoy our content, make sure you hit that like button down below. Subscribe to the channel if you are new. That is the best way to support our work, and it also ensures that you can stay up to date with all of the latest news and coverage. And that said, let's start this redistricting story actually a couple days ago out of Virginia, where the Virginia Supreme Court officially denied the Democrat request to lift the temporary injunction. So you may remember we covered this story a few days ago. A lower court in Virginia struck down the redistricting referendum that Democrats just passed in that state, basically arguing that many state laws and the Constitution and parliamentary procedures were violated in the creation of that special election, which was indeed true. But I was a little skeptical because thus far the Virginia Supreme Court largely sided with allowing that to go forward. But in this case, the Virginia Supreme Court is keeping that injunction in. Now, what does that mean? You may remember this from all the times Trump has fought against these temporary injunctions. Well, basically, the Virginia referendum is blocked. It cannot be certified. It cannot be enacted until this legal proceeding takes place. And given that the lower court that is handling this case has sided against the referendum thus far, it's pretty clear they're going to go in, do the case, and then strike it down. Now, Virginia Democrats almost guaranteed will appeal, and we'll see where that all goes. But here is the central thing we need to remember. Time is not necessarily on the Virginia Democrats' side. Do they actually have the time to handle these legal battles? Because, keep in mind, primary elections here are supposed to start very soon. Can they get this all figured out and draw a new congressional map while fighting all these legal challenges in time? I think it's of serious doubt. Now, quite hilariously, I actually researched it. Apparently, Virginia Democrats tried to postpone the primary date for this election cycle from like May to August, if I'm not mistaken, in order to, literally they quietly did this in order to handle any potential legal battles that may have came. These people are so freaking shady. But still, even then, okay, so you can't just finally win all your legal battles by August and then put it into place, you would think, right? You have to actually have candidates file, campaign before the August primaries, certification dates or filing deadlines, I should say. None of this seems like it's going to happen in time. We'll find out, but I would put right now maybe a 40% less than that, maybe a minority chance at this point, that Virginia Democrats are able to actually get their referendum enacted and congressional districts redrawn before the primary date. It's possible, but maybe not likely at this point. So major blow, again, because they put all this money, all this hype into the referendum. It barely passes, first and foremost. And then secondly, appears it won't be held up by the courts. Well, that is a bad scenario for Democrats, because now that redistricting effort you just did has been written off. But simultaneously, after Florida Republicans announced they would effectively be retaliating against Virginia, they still nonetheless have gone through, and today the Florida House overwhelmingly passed the new congressional maps, which have been drawn to add up to 4 new Republican U.S. House seats. So Virginia opened the bag, and they're not even sure if their map will hold up. But in the meantime, Ron DeSantis, at least some Republican out there, did his job, and it's looking like this is going to go ahead. Take a listen.
Mr. Speaker.
Show the bill passes. Read the next bill.
None on the desk, Mr. Speaker.
So yeah, already on a statewide level, it is a bad position for Democrats. And you may ask too, by the way, well, if Virginia Democrats got blocked in court, couldn't the same thing happen to Florida Republicans? Hypothetically, but here's the reason I would say no. Is first and foremost, Florida Republicans didn't break a bunch of their own laws in the process, right? They didn't keep this special session open for 2 years and ram it through while abusing all these parliamentary procedures. They did it in a fairly standard way, right? So, it's worth noting Virginia Democrats, from the moment they tried to get this and rush it on the ballot, opened the door for so many legal challenges, because they basically did the whole power grab illegally and didn't really, close any loose ends there. But then secondly, here's the other important factoid to point out. Whereas the Virginia Supreme Court is relatively in the middle, they have some conservative justices, some liberal justices. Keep in mind, only about a decade and a half ago did it really become a blue state, and even then it still changed hands a couple times. But in comparison, the Florida Supreme Court is arguably the most conservative in the entire United States. Take a listen to this statistic. All 7 current Florida Supreme Court justices have been appointed by Republican governors, primarily being Ron DeSantis there. So yeah, needless to say, I don't think Democrats stand a great chance in court in the way that maybe Virginia Republicans do. So yeah, it just, again, they really screwed themselves over with this whole game. But ladies and gentlemen, it doesn't even stop there, because now let's look nationally to the Voting Rights Act that the Supreme Court more or less gutted today. And to explain that whole situation, let's kind of use this visual of, again, what is the VRA? Well, basically, if you ever looked at congressional maps, and especially the Deep South, right, heavily Republican states, you may be asking yourself, why is there so much blue? Look at this picture, for example. There seemed to be an overrepresentation of Democrats in the Deep South, at least in comparison to what you see in other parts of the country in deep blue or deep red states. You notice, by the way, talk about gerrymandering, how oddly shaped a lot of these districts are. And what a lot of people maybe didn't know until recently is that these are all mandated by the federal government, right? Because as part of some of the civil rights legislation of the 1960s, we had Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, passed by Democrats, by the way. I really wonder why. I don't know. Just keep that in mind. Which effectively says, okay, so this is what the VRA says, is that if your state has a sizable enough portion of a minority population, for example, think about black people in the South, because after all, southern states still have today the largest black population. So if you have a certain number of a minority group, you basically are legally and federally mandated to draw what's called majority minority districts, effectively like districts specially made for black people and black populations. And, quite understandably, by the way, these things almost always turn out to be Democrat districts because black Americans overwhelmingly, like 85 to 90%, vote Democrat in America. So that is what this is. It is effectively redistricting DEI, redistricting affirmative action, where it doesn't even matter, as you can see visually, by the way, if the districts make sense. A lot of times they literally are gerrymanders because you have to like carve out the whole black population in the state and make this sort of artificial district for them, even if it stretches across like hundreds of miles. Keep in mind too, by the way, this almost never goes in the reverse, right? White people, for example, do not get majority minority districts in, say, New Mexico or California. It's entirely basically a DEI law. And we've sort of hyped up the idea for several months now that the Supreme Court could be striking it down. Why is that significant? Well, because I think it's important to understand that when you look at, for example, House control and the way in which, it seems like the House every couple of decades is, it's super razor thin, who's going to control it? That actually, to a large extent, the Democrat power base in this country is completely fake and artificial. And what we mean by that is because, well, look at what blue states have done this decade, right? Blue states in the West, like California, blue states in the North, like Illinois, they're drawing whatever freaking districts they want. They're making it 100% Democrat gerrymandered. But in the most Republican states in this country, we can't really do the same. Why is that? Because the federal law that basically mandates pro-Democrat gerrymandering, hey, gerrymandering Democrats, look at this. Look at the DEI districts. I mean, look at the shapes, right? The DEI districts that we are basically forced to draw on your behalf. Because of this federal law, it makes it harder for Republicans to maybe strike back in the way that Democrats would. That is, of course, until now, when the Supreme Court today has effectively gutted, to a large extent, Section 2 of that very Voting Rights Act on a 6-3 basis. So this is huge news. Take a listen.
Good morning. Okay, so this at first blush here is a win for the plaintiffs who were not black plaintiffs. They were non-minority voters who challenged this decision. These two districts that were minority majority. Essentially, Louisiana had drawn up districts and then they were told in a legal battle that they had not represented black and minority voters sufficiently. They went back and drew a second district. So they had two of these minority majority districts. Well, then non-black voters sued and said, this is now violating our rights on the basis of race. So it looks like this is a 6-3 decision. There is one concurrence here, but it looks like the dissent sticks together with Justices Kagan, Sotomayor, and Jackson. But here's what the majority says. They say in some, because the Voting Rights Act did not require Louisiana to create an additional majority-minority district, no compelling interest justified the state's use of race in creating SB 8. That was those two new districts. That map is an unconstitutional gerrymander, and its use would violate the plaintiff's constitutional rights. Now, this opinion is almost 100 pages long, so we're going through to see if it says something more broadly about the Voting Rights Act. That had been the fear on the left, that somehow this decision, if it was favorable for those challenging these maps, that it would somehow do a big chunk out of the Voting Rights Act. Haven't gotten to language that suggests that yet. It sounds like this decision is primarily about what happened in Louisiana. So we'll keep digging through this. But for right now, it's a win for those who were challenging these two minority majority districts. Now, as we read through this and figure out the broader implications, there were 20 plus districts across the country that would have potentially lined up with this decision. They could be open to challenges that they were drawn on the basis of race, or that it was the primary factor that was used in drawing those districts. Most of those are throughout the South. So we'll look to see if there's enough sweeping language in this particular decision that may have a domino effect on some 20 other districts. Could be huge for the midterms. We'll continue to read through.
Now, to be clear, it appears the Supreme Court stopped a little bit short of striking down Section 2 of the VRA altogether, which I'm a little disappointed about. But still, as you heard, they've basically set the precedent where this effectively, right, in practice no longer has to be a thing. The legal challenges in favor of these Democrat DEI districts are likely going to fail based on the Supreme Court precedent. In the reverse, very likely these states will be able to get rid of their ridiculous pro-Democrat DEI gerrymanders, as you can, again, see on your screen right here. And by the way, it makes perfect logical sense. Because after all, if we were supposed to be supposedly told that the civil rights movement was allegedly, at least they claimed, about ending racial discrimination, then why exactly should the drawing of congressional maps include racial discrimination or really race as a factor at all, right? It's like when you think about it, you could call it DEI, you could call it congressional map drawing segregation. I'm not exactly sure, but you just notice what's going on here, because on one hand, it might even make sense if, say, there's a huge portion of a city that's full of a black population. They're all living together. Okay, you can make that a district. But notice, because of this federal mandate, again, the pro-Democrat DEI law that forces this stuff into congressional redistricting, I mean, look at the maps, again, that you see across the South. It's these crazy zigzags. It's these like pointy things. And, this is, by the way, what Democrats support. Supposedly, the anti-gerrymandering Democrats are mandating and forcing southern deep red states to literally gerrymander states on their own behalf. And now that that's going away, obviously, as you could expect, Democrats are not happy. Why is that? Well, take a look at the image on your left, right? This is the current Deep South, way too much Democrat representation. And on the right, as you heard there, around 20 or so districts that are these, majority minority Democrat gerrymanders could be removed. And yes, the math there for Democrats in terms of what they'd lose if the Deep South basically goes fully Republican in terms of districting is terrible for them. And that is, of course, exactly why you are hearing so much panic from the left wing.
They think 19 seats could be at risk all throughout the South. The question will be the timing. Is this a 2028 play? Is this a 2026 play? There are some primaries here coming up, not until later in the cycle. August 6th, there's one in Tennessee. That's Steve Cohen's seat. That's a majority minority district. That's in August 6th. The one Democratic seat there. The Jim Clyburn seat in South Carolina. That is the Democratic seat in South Carolina. That's a June 9th primary. Jamie, this shows you the ramifications long term for this ruling.
Leah, what do you see as the ripple effects? Are there other states that could now redraw their maps that you think are going to be likely to do so?
It's very possible. So one expert on voting rights, Professor Nick Stephanopoulos at Harvard Law School, actually estimated that a ruling to this effect in Louisiana versus Calais could affect up to potentially 50 legislative districts. Now, that's not to say all of those states might redraw their districts so close to the midterm elections, but that does underscore what a significant effect this ruling will have on our democracy and who is able to obtain political power. So Florida, we know, has expressed interest in potentially doing some redistricting. Their initial plan for when they were going to do so was pushed back when we didn't have this decision last week. But my guess is they will get that process started now.
Well, hey, I mean, that's true. It is pretty close to the midterms. But after all, Republican states could simply follow in the model of Virginia Democrats and just postpone the primaries. Why not, right? Apparently, you could just do that. But still, nonetheless, I want people to understand that Democrats really are fuming, yes, because their power structure is beginning to evaporate in this country. But ultimately, it's actually now that they have to play the game fair. They don't have this artificial built-in advantage because effectively the Deep South, the hardcore Republican parts of the country, are nerfed. They are weakened by the fact that some Democrat wrote up a federal law that basically only is designed to help Democrats. Because let's repeat, right, that California, that New Mexico, Democrat states with minority white populations, never have had to draw up their own white districts that would favor Republicans, even though they would. That's just not a thing. Theoretically, the law should actually apply to that. But as you know, really what a lot of the civil rights regime is about is mere anti-white discrimination. But it never goes in that direction. You look at, for example, parts of the Northeast, and those are kind of where the white liberal populations live. They don't have to deal with that. But obviously, because guess what? The black population of this country is still heavily concentrated within the Deep South. Oh, let's have this law that basically only applies over there and only is there designed to hurt Republicans. Other parts of the country are able to draw districts basically as freely as they want, as pro-partisan as they want. The Deep South is weakened. Now, suddenly, that the Republican part of this country is basically unlocked. This is the type of whining you see, right? Pete Buttigieg. Today's Supreme Court decision reverses hard-won progress under the Voting Rights Act. I don't know what that hard-won progress is. Again, DEI, like let's do discrimination through redistricting. It doesn't even make any sense. But another great point that a lot of people have been making, by the way, is that you notice, again, these Democrats, they're talking about gerrymandering. The difference between supposed Republican gerrymandering and Democrat gerrymandering. For example, I showed you what the maps in the Deep South look like because of the law that the Democrats support. It's literally just gerrymander. Right? Like Democrats just support gerrymandering that is in favor of them. And that's what people need to understand. By the way, but we pointed this out many times last year when we were talking about it, but look at the, of course, quite infamous Illinois Supreme redistricting map. That is obviously a Democrat gerrymander. It's just an atrocity. What is this right here? What the heck is going on over there? Right? Just all these crazy lines, all these zigzags. And you compare that, by the way, to the way in which supposed Republican gerrymanders would now be taking place without the Voting Rights Act. And, take a look by comparison. You notice there's a couple of odd shapes, but it's more or less, like linear. It's symmetrical. It makes sense that I believe this would be, Alabama, right? This is the Florida map, by the way, that is currently being proposed that would eliminate some Democrat seats. And once again, you notice it sort of like makes sense, right? You have District 1, then District 2, then District 3. And they seem to represent the normal major population centers, right? It's like, look at that map. Do you look at this map immediately and think, oh, that's gerrymandered? No. Meanwhile, compare this to the map that Democrats are trying to draw over in Virginia. I'm going to go down here. It's a complete monstrosity on the bottom. Like, what the heck is that, right? Notice all the crazy lines, the zigzags, the things they have to cut out. But that's, of course, what's really hilarious is that what Democrats call gerrymandering is basically Republicans drawing relatively more or less normal districts, right? Notice how, in order for Republicans to gerrymander allegedly in their favor, all they have to do is draw like normal districts that make sense. Whereas when Democrats have to gerrymander in their favor, it looks like this, right? It looks like you literally just like took a piece of paper and went, just zigzagged all over the place. Oh, that's Democrats, by the way, Which honestly tells you a lot. It tells you a lot about who really is playing unfair in this country and, who really needs to gerrymander to maintain some political support. It's hilarious because I was basically taught in school that the, Deep South racist white conservatives had to gerrymander in order to protect their political control or something. And then you grow up and see what congressional maps actually look like. And you notice that's not really actually what was happening in the Deep South, or at least, is what's going to happen in the Deep South. Rather, it's literally the Democrats and the civil rights regime who forces gerrymandering upon everyone else, right? So, this is Florida. That's what Illinois would be if they follow this plan they're doing to maybe remove all of the Republican seats. Here's Louisiana, by the way, without the crazy gerrymandering. And you notice it makes a lot more sense. It actually looks a lot more geographical and symmetrical, whereas if California wanted to gerrymander more, this is what it would look like. It's like these squiggly lines all across the state. Again, guys, maybe it's the case that a lot of what supposedly is the Democrat political control and the Democrat mandate over this country for the past several decades isn't actually real. And as we've argued, they've effectively been like rigging elections this entire time. And now that they're no longer able to do that, they're losing their minds. So there you have it, though, guys. A huge sort of bloodbath day, frankly, for Democrats in the redistricting battle. You're looking at anywhere from 10 to 20 seats lost between now and 2028, depending on who decides to go ahead and redistrict. We got to certainly push Republican states to do that. How many could take place before the midterms? I'm not exactly sure, but this is good news. Undeniably, this is good news. So there you have it, guys. That said, let me know your thoughts. Be sure to leave a like on this video, subscribe to the channel if you were new, and until next time, God bless and peace.